Hello, welcome to Blog Talk Radio. My name is Kathy and I'm here with Caitlin. We are both graduate students at the University at Albany in the Social Welfare Program. Today, Caitlin and I are completing our three-part informational discussion for Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Today in Session 3, we want to tie everything together with some laws and protections that are available for survivors, some case examples, and an interview with Lima James, a recent graduate at the University of Albany, who will be talking about a new course being offered on trafficking at the college. Hi, Caitlin. Welcome back.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited that this is the end of our session, but I'm also kind of sad that it's ending.
So we've really gone over a lot of things in these three sessions. First session, we identified what human trafficking was and went over some of those definitions. Then we were able to identify who was being trafficked and even how to talk to them and help them once we've identified who they are. So I've been thinking, I know what now to do as a clinician on a one-on-one with a client, and if I don't feel that it's something that is in my scope of practice, I know where I can refer these survivors to. But looking at a bigger scale, I'm just wondering what kind of laws and protections are available out there that I don't know about.
Well, we actually have quite a lot of legal protections, especially in New York State. I'm not going to go that in depth about what the laws mean and probably not even that much about what they do. Some of the laws that we have in New York State in 2007, we passed the Anti-Trafficking law, which provides a number of services for both sex and labor. New York State was the first state to pass what is called the Safe Harbor laws, which provides all victims of commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC, and minor sex trafficking with services. And the purpose of this law is to take these children out of the juvenile justice system and provide them services.
I'm just curious, what kind of services are they talking about providing through the Safe Harbor Act?
Under the Safe Harbor Act, survivors of CSEC and minor trafficking are entitled to crisis intervention services, provision of the basic needs, including food, clothing, medical care, short-term safe housing, long-term safe housing, educational and vocational counseling, and legal services. Now, just because they're entitled to this doesn't necessarily mean that these services are actually provided. Sometimes there's not any housing available in your area, but under this law, these services are provided, and we can talk about it a little bit later, but it's actually under the Safe Harbor Act that my agency, the International Organization for Adolescents, IOFA, is funded, and this is how we are doing our project, is through this law.
So Caitlin, what other services can we find here in New York State?
So in New York State, we also have this thing called Vacating Convictions. So with Vacating Convictions, survivors of sex trafficking can seek to vacate convictions for prostitution or loitering for the purpose of engaging in prostitution. So with adults, they may seek to vacate their convictions by returning to the court where they were convicted if they can prove their involvement was related to sex trafficking. If it was a child who was charged as a juvenile, after the child reaches the age of 16, he or she can actually have their records sealed. So for both adults and minors, this is going to be really beneficial for getting jobs.
So this is a way of almost erasing what happened to them so it doesn't hinder them when they want to get a job or move on with their lives after this happens.
Correct.
So you said that the adults have to prove. How is it that they go about doing that? What do they need to do?
Well, one of the ways they can prove that they are a survivor of sex trafficking is actually through the New York State confirmation process. So New York State has this process, which is actually under the 2007 Anti-Trafficking law that we talked about before. So the confirmation process is a way for a survivor of trafficking, both sex and labor, to receive services, and they will actually get a physical piece of paper that acknowledges that they are a survivor of trafficking. Under the confirmation process, anytime a law enforcement official believes that they have a survivor of either sex or labor trafficking, they are required to fill out this form and send it to the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance and the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. So the confirmation process may be required for some adult victims of trafficking to receive services. However, confirmation is not required for minors to access social services related to their trafficking situation.
Now, are there any glitches with this confirmation?
Like we said before, only law enforcement representatives may refer a victim for confirmation. So law enforcement, just like people listening here, just like social services, a lot of times they aren't aware of what trafficking is. They're not aware that this process exists. So a lot of times they're not being confirmed and they're not going through this process.
So a social worker can't send somebody to this process. We can't recommend this process.
No, we can't, but what we can do is we can build connections with your local law enforcement, local uniformed officers, probation, district attorneys, PINS officers, state police, federal agents, tribal law enforcement, anyone really who's law enforcement, and build those connections with them. So when you have someone who's a victim or a survivor of trafficking, you can go like, I have this person, can we get them through the confirmation process? I want to emphasize that this isn't required for minors. It also should be noted that to be confirmed, a survivor does not have to actually work with law enforcement for a conviction for their trafficker. So they don't have to cooperate with law enforcement. There doesn't need to be a conviction. It's just you're a survivor, and this will open some doors up for them to get services.
So it's really important then for us as social workers to make sure that we build connections and communicate with all those other agencies so that we can provide or allow these people to get these services that they're going to need.
You're absolutely right, Kathy, and I think this is really important with trafficking survivors because trafficking survivors have so many different areas of need. So the only way to comprehensively address trafficking situations is through a multidisciplinary team. You need all of these services working together to address the situation in order to do the best you can for your survivor. And one of the reasons why it's also important to know about the confirmation process, looking at a macro view, the confirmation process right now is the only official data collection method used by New York State to count the victims of human trafficking. And this process, as I said before, is very underutilized. We need to use this process and we need to track these survivors so we can actually show that this is a problem in New York State. This is a problem not just in New York City, but the whole entire state, so we can get that funding, so we can get those laws passed, so we can actually work on addressing this problem.
Yes, it's important to know how many survivors are out there. So we know now what we have available to us here in New York State. Are there any other services that are available or protections available on a federal level?
There are. The biggest one is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. This is the huge federal law that in the first session we gave all those definitions of what sex trafficking is, what labor trafficking is. This is the law that actually defined it. And it's through this federal law that we know that people under the age of 18 are automatically survivors of sex trafficking. This is the law that established that. So this law protects adults and minors, sex and labor, U.S. citizens, and foreign-born nationals. It entitles all of these people to various services, including legal representation, due process, medical attention, access to social services, compensation for damages, and it also allows foreign-born victims to seek residence to stay in the United States.
Now, is this foreign-born under age 18?
Nope, for adults and minors.
Okay.
And there's one other law that I briefly want to talk about, and it's actually pretty new. It actually was passed in September of last year, and it won't actually go into effect until 2016. Right now it's called HR 4980, and this is specifically for minors. And this law is going to do various things, but one of the things that it will do, it will require immediately reporting of children identified as victims of sex trafficking according to the federal definition, so under the age of 18, to law enforcement, and immediately reporting information on missing or abducted children in foster care, including AWOL youth, to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and to law enforcement. Additionally, there is going to be a screening component with this law. It will require youth who come back from running away or from AWOLing from their placement to be screened for trafficking. So again, this law isn't in effect yet. Right now, various agencies are analyzing this law to determine exactly how this will be implemented in New York State and what this law will actually mean to service providers.
Now, the screening tool that's going to be used, is that one of the screening tools that your agency is working on creating?
Yes, actually it is. So do we have time to talk a little bit about my internship?
Yes, you mentioned earlier that the Safe Harbor Act was what was funding your internship. So I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more exactly what you're doing at your internship and how you came about to this project.
So under the Safe Harbor Act, OCFS, or the Office of Children and Family Services, is Responsible for providing all these services and responses to identify commercial sexual exploitation of children, or CSEC, and minor sex trafficking. So OCFS hired my organization, IOFA, to provide a systematic, statewide, sustainable response to minor sex and labor trafficking in New York State. We started this project with 5 pilot counties, and we are now up to 8, and we'll be adding up to 10 more in the next year, including Albany. We do a lot of things in this with our program. One of them is trainings, so we provide 1-day and 2-day trainings in all of our pilot counties.
Is there a cost for the training?
No, they're free. Another aspect of our training is we are also training child advocacy centers and the Department of Juvenile Justice and Opportunities for Youth, DJ Joy, about human trafficking. So in the trainings, we discuss what is trafficking, how do you identify it, how do you address trauma. And we also provide technical assistance. Anyone who comes to our training can call for technical assistance, and this could be anything from I need a referral to I keep on hitting this wall in this case and I need some help talking it through. Through this, we're also providing some written documents. One is a handbook. The handbook is going to be a very step-by-step. You have someone who you think is a trafficking survivor sitting in front of you. What do you do? This book is specifically for frontline staff who may not know anything about trafficking. So it's supposed to be a very easy, comprehensive guide for anyone in New York State. We're also providing a blueprint, which is going to be for the counties who may not get funding under this Safe Harbor project. And this will be how do you actually build county-wide response to minor sex and labor trafficking in your area. And the handbook will be available for free download later this year. And one last written thing that we are providing, like you mentioned before, a screening tool. We have developed a very short, rapid screening tool that is currently being tested in our pilot counties and will hopefully be available pretty soon. And this is New York State and minor specific to help you identify both sex and labor trafficking with minors.
I'm really excited to see the tool.
Thanks.
Is there anything else, Caitlin, that you'd like to add about the protections that are out there before we get to our case studies?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, and this was a very brief overview of some really complex laws that provide various services to various people. So if you want to know more, research it. If you're not in New York and you want to know the protections in your state, or if you have safe harbor laws in your state, that's another thing that you can research. I can hopefully provide some links that might be of assistance to you, but I can't say it enough. The best thing you can do is educate yourself.
That's good advice. Okay, so we have identified what human trafficking is. We've talked about how to identify who the survivors are when they come into our office. We've talked about the legal protections that are available for the survivors. Now let's put that all together and review some case studies and see if we can determine whether this is an actual trafficking situation and what as an agency we could do for these survivors or these individuals. I'm going to read a case example, and I'd like you as the audience to listen closely as we are and try to see if you can figure out what the answer to this particular case would be. So the first case says, I wanted to make money to support my family. I was looking for an opportunity to come to America, and my friend introduced me to a woman in the market who said she could help me. She said I would have to pay her $5,000 before I left for America, and I would be working for a family cleaning their house. She told me I would get paid a lot of money, and this seemed like a good opportunity for me. I borrowed $5,000 from someone in my hometown, and the woman from the market arranged for me to travel with a fake passport to the U.S. When I got there, they did not give me much food, and the place I slept was cold and dirty. I slept on the floor. It was not just cleaning. I had to take the kids to school, do all the grocery shopping, and cooking and cleaning, and never had a break or a day off. I was scared of my employers who threatened me. They told me I did not do my paperwork correctly. They would protect me from the police since I had come illegally, that I owed them $15,000 and could pay off my debt. After deducting for room and board, they paid me $70 a week. So what kind of a case is this?
Well, off the top of your head, what do you think? Do you think that this would be a case of trafficking, or do you think that something else is happening here?
Well, I think it's trafficking because she's being threatened and she's working and not getting paid for it. But I'm wondering if maybe it's smuggling too, because she did come from another country into the US. So I'm a little torn. It could be smuggling, it could be trafficking.
Right, you're exactly right. This is, like we talked in session one, this is an example of a case that started as smuggling and turned into trafficking. So in the beginning, the survivor was willingly smuggled into the country, and then after he or she arrived, it turned into a case of trafficking. So with this case, to identify that it is trafficking, we'd look for the red flags such as the violence and fear of violence and threats to the person. In this case, they feel like they can't leave and they're being paid little to no money. One of the reasons why I really like these cases is this past fall we had what a lot of people were calling the unaccompanied alien crisis or unaccompanied minor crisis, where we had over 60,000 minors from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador coming to America. It's estimated that over half of these children were trafficked either on their way into America, and they're extremely vulnerable to trafficking while they're in America too. And so being able to identify trafficking on their journey and trafficking here is really important to be able to provide services, especially since a lot of these unaccompanied minors are actually being settled into New York State, specifically around New York City and Long Island.
So even though this case doesn't specify the age of the survivor, it's quite possible that the survivor is a minor.
Right.
And that's why that is very important.
Right.
Okay. All right, here's another case. Let's see what this one says. My teacher told my parents that I wanted to be called by a girl's name and was wearing girls' clothes at school. My parents beat me up and told me that they gave birth to a son, not a daughter, and that I was no longer their child. I left home and have been hanging out with other transgender girls. I slept outside until a friend told me to go to a shelter. I told the shelter I'm 18, even though I'm 16, so I don't get sent to ACS or get my family in trouble. They housed me in the boys section and I didn't feel safe. I couldn't go to school because the shelter rules say I have to get a job. No one will hire me. Employers laugh at me and say that they don't hire people like me. I can't get hired without an ID, and my parents still have my birth certificate, social security card, and I don't have a high school diploma. Some of the girls in the shelter made money by having sex. My friends say they would show me how to make money and take care of myself. They set me up on a date, the first time I ever had sex. It was really scary, but I made $100. I don't want to keep doing it, but I don't know what else to do. I don't know where I'm going to go when I get discharged from the shelter next week. Well, this is a very interesting case. Mm-hmm. And I know you're going to ask me if I think this is a case of trafficking or not. And there's nobody making this person have sex. So I don't know. Can it be trafficking if there isn't a person initiating the act?
Right. So again, under the federal definition, anyone under the age of 18 who exchanged a sex act for a commodity is a trafficking survivor. So under federal law, she would be victim or a survivor of CSEC or sex trafficking. So even though there's no third-party exploiter, again, it doesn't matter. She's under 18. She can't consent to regular sex. She can't consent to commercial sex. So in this case, who we would generally call the trafficker would be the actual person buying sex from her, if that helps you think about it.
That does help me. I was trying to picture who that third party would be. So obviously it would be the person paying for the sex.
Right, because it's that commercial exchange again.
That makes sense.
So one thing I love about this case is that there's a lot of needs that this client has that we can identify. So let's just go and try to identify, like, you have this client sitting in front of you, what would be one of the first things that you would do?
Well, one of the first things, obviously, is providing some safety for the client. We'll make sure they have a safe place to go and to stay, not in the boys section, but the girls section of whatever facility we can get them into. The other thing that I thought would be very important in this case is to validate who she is and how she sees herself and make sure that she's referred to by the correct pronouns and not made to feel that there is something wrong with her because of how she identifies.
Right. Exactly right. You should always use the preferred pronouns and names that your client uses. Other things that I can identify, she hasn't been going to school. She needs to get in school. You kind of mentioned the shelter, but she needs to be sheltered with females, and she needs LGBTQ specific and supportive services. She doesn't have the ID, which is going to be hard to get her into school and also to get her jobs. So take her down to DHS and help her get her Social Security, help her get her whatever identification she needs.
All right, let's look at the next case. In my neighborhood, you have to belong to a gang to be safe. Most of my family is in a street gang. I mainly grew up with my grandmother, but I'm still considered a legacy. My friends all belong to this gang. They asked me to hold drugs for them, and I did it because I didn't think it was a big deal. They told me I lost some of the drugs, and now I owe them money. I don't think I lost the drugs, but I can't argue with them because I've seen what happens to people who argue with them. They told me I can work off my debt by selling drugs for them at school. I thought I could sell enough to pay them back in a couple weeks, but now they're saying I still owe them more money. I don't want to deal drugs, but I'm afraid of what will happen if I stop. All right, so let's think a minute.
This is a tough one.
It is a tough one. Before we had this series, and I've learned as much as I've learned from you, my initial response would have been, this is just a drug dealer. This is maybe a young drug dealer, maybe a teenager, but I would assume in my old life that they were using and they were dealing, and this was a choice and not some form of trafficking. But I'm guessing that I am definitely wrong here, and that there is some kind of trafficking here. It's not sexual trafficking, so it must be labor. Right, trafficking.
This is definitely a case of labor trafficking, and we would hope that, like you, this would be identified as a trafficking case. Unfortunately, they would probably be arrested. Using labor trafficking survivors to do criminal acts is probably one of the worst forms of trafficking, in my opinion, especially because they aren't identified and they're arrested. It makes it harder for them to go to law enforcement because they believe they're going to be arrested, because they believe that they're complacent. Their traffickers tell them that they're going to get arrested for this. So unfortunately, they would probably be arrested. But again, we believe that this is a minor. This minor has been forced to sell drugs to other youth. The child is compelled by fear, verbal assault, and violence that they've witnessed at the hands of the gang to continue selling drugs, even though that they don't want to. In this case, the child's labor is dealing drugs, and it's done only to protect them from harm, and the labor is done for the profit of the local gang. So, like always, we're social workers. We not only have to be aware of current events and aware of potential legislation and policies that may affect our clients, but we also have to act on it. So you need to contact your legislator. Tell them to support policies that will protect both minor and adult sex and labor trafficking survivors, not only federally, but also in your area.
That's a great opportunity, and please do contact your legislatures and let them know what you're thinking. I hope these case examples were informative to you all, and perhaps you can even use these as examples when you're telling your agencies about trafficking and help them to understand how to recognize and see trafficking and what we as social workers can do for trafficking. Caitlin, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this information with us. I know there's so much more that we can learn about this topic, and I do hope that everybody that's listening will keep this conversation going so we can get more people involved. I'm going to leave you now, but I want to thank everyone for tuning in and ask that you please stay tuned, because Caitlin's going to close out the series with her interview with Lima James.
Hello and welcome back. In this section, we will be talking with Lima James. Lima is a graduate of SUNY Albany School of Social Welfare with her master's in macro concentration social work. She also obtained a BA in Spanish and minors in International Studies and Latino Studies at the University of Connecticut. Her background in human trafficking work includes her position as the Anti-Human Trafficking Policy Intern at the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, where she focused on human trafficking and its intersection with the child welfare system. In addition, Lima advocated around the issue at SUNY Albany, where she organized a conference with the help of faculty and students. She also initiated an independent study on human trafficking, which produced a curriculum and syllabus for an elective course on human trafficking. Currently, Lima is the Education and Training Coordinator at Lifeway Network, a nonprofit in New York City collaborating to confront trafficking through safe housing for women survivors of trafficking and education for the community. Welcome, Lima, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the call.
So, to begin, how did you become interested in the topic of human trafficking?
Well, it was through a blog post that I had read of an interview of a survivor of human trafficking, and, she talked about her experiences, and at the end of her interview, she said for anyone who's interested in learning more, it's often, people often get stuck and don't know how to kind of start. So she offered help and offered people to reach out to her. So, I was very moved by reading her blog post, and so I reached out to her and, kind of connected and started doing my own research and attending a lot of conferences and workshops and doing a lot of research on my own, reading books. That's where it really started. And then as I was going through these workshops, I was at the Albany School of Social Welfare doing my master's, and I thought, here I am at, School of Social Welfare, why shouldn't we be doing something about this issue? So that's where I really, brought the issue to the school and kind of got the school active on the issue. And our dean, Catherine Byerloff, she was extremely on board about taking on this issue and being a part of the movement.
So one way that you and the dean and the school decided to take on this movement is by developing an elective course about human trafficking. Can you tell me a little bit more about this course?
Of course, right. So, before the course, we kind of evaluated where students stood on this issue and the interest level. So we did a conference for the school and for students and community members to attend, and it was, well received. So from there, we did the independent study, and that was myself and 3 other master's level students. So we worked on creating the syllabus for this elective course, and that's where we really looked at the macro level and micro, clinical level and the policy level of this issue, both globally and domestically in the U.S. So, that's the focus of the course. It's going to be an overview of the issue and, individuals who take the course, how they can take action, how they can identify victims in their workforces and professions, and, how to be able to properly report a situation if they identify something, and also they are, working in a clinical or counseling type situation where they're actually interacting with potential victims, how to interact with those survivors. So those are the kind of things that we'll be focused on in the course. It's going to be, as I said, the macro, micro, and policy level. So touching all of those areas for the different professions who will be taking the course and seeing how it fits in their specific professions.
That's great. Just from hearing about the course, I would have thought that it would have been focusing just on clinical students or just on macro students. So I'm excited that it's a course that is open for both of the students.
It's actually, it's going to be open to students of SUNY Albany, and if other students in colleges near SUNY Albany are interested in taking it, that's also an option. And community members, it's all open to community members too, so it's there for a variety of audiences, and we are hoping to get students, of course, from the School of Social Welfare, public health, education, women's studies, whoever wants to take it, it is open to them.
And when should we expect this course to happen?
So this is going to be a summer elective course, and it will be offered as a 6-week elective course, and it starts the end of May and ends the first week of July. So for anyone who's interested in the course, the best place to look would be School of Social Welfare's website and course catalog for the summer 2015. So it should be there soon.
That's great. Through these sessions, I've talked a lot about why I think it's important for social workers and community members to become educated about this program, about human trafficking in general. Why do you personally think that students and community members should be taking this course and should be learning about human trafficking?
So, like I said, one of our main focuses is bringing awareness to the community. And as of right now, a lot of individuals in our community in the U.S., when they hear human trafficking, especially the term trafficking, they tend to think about trafficking in other countries, and they don't necessarily connect it as an issue that's happening in the U.S. So definitely bringing that awareness and to be able to educate them on looking out for red flags and signs of potential situations, because it's happening here, it's happening in all 50 states, and that's been reported through Polaris, one of the national leading nonprofit organizations, and especially in New York. Polaris has, through their hotline statistics, reported that New York is one of the top 5 states with the highest number of reported trafficking cases. So it's happening in New York, it's happening in, probably anyone's counties, and so social service providers are probably seeing potential victims but not being able to identify because they don't know the signs. So the goal is for us to educate them so that they can look out for the signs and properly report and properly provide services.
That's great. Well, that's the end of the questions that I have for you. Do you have any additional information that you want to leave us with?
At this time, no, I don't.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for telling us about this course that's going to be happening at SUNY Albany. And I hope that this is going to be a way for students and community members to become more educated and respond to human trafficking in our area.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.